Hello, book lovers. Welcome back to another book review. Thank you for tuning in. And what makes a killer? Is evil something you're born with, or is it created by circumstance? Mi-ae Sew's The Only Child is a gripping psychological thriller that explores this very question, blending elements of Silence of the Lambs with a chilling domestic mystery. If you love crime fiction, dark psychological studies, and twisted thrillers, this book might just be for you. So let me just show you the cover before I get into it. So The Only Child by Saw Mi-ae. You can see that okay. And it was translated by Chong Ye-won, who's I've reviewed several of Chong Ye-won's other translations elsewhere on the channel. And this novel was published back in 2020. Can't believe it's been so long, actually. And when it was published, it was the first sort of big new Korean translated fiction release of the year. And at the time, it was very highly anticipated. It was very widely hyped, and it was riding a wave of anticipation. Why was it riding a wave of anticipation? So, Saw is a best-selling novelist, drama writer, and movie writer, and this was her first book to be translated into English. I think it might still be the only book she's had translated into English. And when it was published back in 2020, it was coming hot on the heels of the success of other Korean crime thrillers and horror novels. So just had, or recently just had Pyun Hae-young's The Hole, Chong Yu-jong's The Good Son, and The Plotters by Kim On-soo. And all three of those novels, very different, very distinctive books, they'd all done very well in English translation. And so this novel, The Only Child, was sort of was getting a lot of hype at the time. And so she actually made her debut back in 1994 with an award-winning short story called 30 Ways to Kill Your Husband. I hope my wife doesn't read that one. And she's written several novels, including The Doll's Garden, The Night You Disappeared, and also a short story collection called The Murderer I'd Like to Meet. Like I said, also written some screenplays, written for several dramas, and she's written for dramas that have been adapted from her own novels and stories. So, as I said at the beginning, so there were high expectations for this novel when it was published. And this was because there's the success of several other Korean crime and genre novels. And around about the time when these books were getting published, there was this building sense that Korean thrillers and genre novels were poised to be the next big thing. And this was sort of following on from the Nordic noir series of novels by people like Henning Mankell, and I forget their names now. The guy who wrote the Joe Nesbo, and so there was a lot of Nordic, what got grouped and classed as the Nordic noir novels. And then there's a massive trend for Scottish crime novels, and there was this expectation that maybe Korea was going to be next. Didn't quite play out like that, but at the time, people sort of thought maybe The Only Child will be this tipping point where Korean genre fiction, really enters global mainstream awareness and popularity. Things didn't quite play out like that, though we do still get sort of Korean crime and genre novels, but they haven't really become, a big genre like the Nordic noir books or the Scottish crime books. Didn't quite work out like that. But anyway, let's get back to The Only Child. So what type of crime story is Saw telling, and what influences is she drawing on to tell her story? So this is definitely not a book that hides its influences. It really wears its influences on its sleeve. The main influence is Silence of the Lambs. So the now classic psychological crime thriller by Thomas Harris, about FBI rookie Clarice Starling and infamous serial killer Hannibal Lecter. And of course, there were several books and movies based on these characters, books, movies, TV shows, and so on. In The Only Child, we meet Son Kyung. This is a young woman living in Seoul and teaching criminal psychology at a university. And she too was trained by the FBI. And as such, her students have nicknamed her Clarice after Silence of the Lambs' Clarice Starling. We're also introduced to an infamous notorious serial killer called Lee Byung-do. And Lee Byung-do is currently in prison. He murdered 13 women, possibly murdered many more, and he has a deceptively attractive appearance. This is a common, a familiar trope from a certain type of crime novel, the attractive serial killer. And for some reason, following his arrest, Lee Byung-do insists he will only speak to Son Kyung. Unless we have a familiar setup, young woman, the beginning of her career or in the early period of her career, interviewing a notorious and extremely clever and violent serial killer. So that might sound a little derivative of, the very famous and much loved books and film Silence of the Lambs. Of course, Clarice and Hannibal are genuinely iconic characters. Although honestly, I'm not sure how many good movies or books there are based on those characters. But so how does Saw does Saw manage to escape the shadow of Clarice and Hannibal? Is she bringing anything new to the table here? So it is very derivative. But having said that, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, right? I mean, crime novels often recycle plots and concepts. This happens all the time. And the question really is, how well do you do it? How strong is your mastery of these genre elements? And then there's also there's also another important strand in this novel, which I should mention as well before we go further. Through a series of strange circumstances, Son Kyung's doctor husband has to bring his 11-year-old daughter from his previous marriage to live in their house. And as Son Kyung observes this 11-year-old girl, whose name is Ha-young, she increasingly thinks that this young girl may be a budding psychopath. And so what we find then is we have this juxtaposition of this young Ha-young, who might be a psychopath, and the already incarcerated Lee Byung-do. And so through this sort of comparison of these two, Saw is sort of probing the question of nature or nurture. So are some people born truly evil, destined to be monsters, or is it nurture? Is it the way we were raised, and is it which is it? Which of these things decides who we are? And of course, it's a very old concept. Dozens of movies and books have explored this idea, and Saw does have a lot of fun with it. There's also an unusual musical influence on the story. The Beatles song Maxwell's Silver Hammer plays a key role in the novel, and it's a song that serial killer Lee Byung-do is obsessed with for sort of important reasons in the story. And it recurs throughout the story. This obsession with Maxwell's Silver Hammer recurs throughout the story in various, in sort of significant moments in the plot. And the chorus of the song is as follows. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer came down upon her head. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer made sure that she was dead. And these lyrics have some significance in the story, but it's just a strange little quirk that this particular song, it seemed like a random little element of the story to me. It didn't really kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. Anyway, so did this novel justify the hype at the time? So it is very derivative. There's no escaping it. It's also not very subtle. Really lays its exploration of its themes on pretty thick. There's a pacing problem. Some sections are a little sloppy, and then the conclusion is kind of rushed through. And if you're an avid crime fan, like if you read a lot of crime fiction, there's really nothing new here. It is kind of similar to things, maybe a little bit like Gillian Flynn, the Gone Girl, or Sharp Objects, or something like that. But Flynn is a lot more stylish. You know, they're much more enjoyable, sort of kind of schlocky crime fun to be had with Gillian Flynn's books than there's with this one. The plotters, like the other crime novel, Korean sort of crime and genre books, were all better, I think. The plotters was much more original and unique. The Good Son was more sophisticated. The Good Son's kind of doing something similar as well. Mina, which is about a young girl slipping into very extreme antisocial behaviors, was a kind of more literary and sophisticated version of this story. But nevertheless, there are still some gripping elements. The opening is great. The conclusion is kind of fun. But I think ultimately for me, I thought it was less than the some of its parts. But if you are a fan of psychological thrillers and serial killer fiction, it might be worth reading. But if you want something truly original, perhaps you might want to look elsewhere. Anyway, what do you think? Have you read The Only Child or any other Korean crime thrillers? Please leave a comment and let me know. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more book reviews and deep dives, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.